It was a rainy day. Large drops of rain were falling on the ground and on the people passing by on the avenue. At that time of night, no one noticed the elderly woman walking slowly along the road. The drops fell on her wrinkled cheeks and worn clothes. The old coat had carefully sewn patches, and the antiquated boots would soon fall apart. On her head, there was a large, discreet scarf. In the elderly woman's hands, there was a piece of paper that she constantly looked at while also glancing around. This seems to be the place. Yes, it's the same house number. I finally found it. The elderly woman sighed with relief. She stopped in front of an elegant restaurant. People dressed in expensive clothes were driving luxury cars and entering with satisfied expressions. "You only have time to beg for money," said one of the men, who carelessly passed by the elderly woman. But the elderly woman didn't seem to notice the unpleasant remark. She opened a large glass door and stood still for a moment, looking at the brightly decorated walls and exquisite furniture. Then, she went up to the receptionist's desk. A friendly young woman, who had been smiling kindly just a minute ago, wrinkled her nose and said reluctantly, "You must have the wrong address. Please leave the restaurant immediately. Otherwise, I'll call security." "Dear girl, I'm not leaving. I reserved a place in advance, and I have money." The woman simply couldn't understand why she wasn't allowed to enter. "Are you kidding me? This is a decent place, not somewhere for people like you. Go away." The elderly woman froze in surprise. "Is it because I was mistaken for a beggar?" "Yes, my clothes are old, but they're always clean and don't smell of anything. My hair is clean, and I've never allowed myself to beg for money from strangers, even in the hardest times," she thought. Her thoughts were interrupted by the harsh voice of the young woman. "Robert, come here immediately." A young man in uniform was near the receptionist. "What's going on, Madison? Is there a problem?" "Yes, look at this. She says she needs to come in here and has already paid for a table." "Do something." The security guard looked at the elderly woman with embarrassment. "What can be done?" "Let's check what she says. Show me your reservation." The elderly woman carefully pulled a handkerchief from the inside pocket of her coat and began to unwrap until a document appeared in her hands. "Here, take it." The woman handed her passport to the security guard. "So, your name is Margaret, 80 years old." The man was surprised. "Look, maybe you misunderstood. This isn't a restaurant for people like you. It's better if you stay outside," Madison objected defiantly. "No, I need to go to this particular restaurant." "Check, I made a reservation," the elderly woman insisted. The guard dialed the number, and the response really surprised him. "Yes, indeed. There is a reservation, and it's even paid for. But I'm sorry. This is an elite restaurant, frequented exclusively by wealthy and respected people in the city. We don't want you here." The receptionist intervened again. The woman was deeply offended to hear this. "Why are these people treating me like this? I didn't do anything wrong to them. It was never like this in my youth. We always supported each other, for better or for worse." Margaret was perplexed, but she knew why she was there and wasn't going to back down. "I didn't come here to eat. I need to see the owner." The receptionist and the security guard were perplexed. The receptionist became furious when she saw the elderly woman silently take her reservation and start climbing the long stairs. "Don't you realize what will happen when this beggar approaches the guests?" She snapped at the guard. "What can I do?" Robert responded. "Don't worry. The director will expel her in an instant, and so will we. You have no idea how hard I work to keep a job here, and I don't want to lose my job because of some old woman. I'm going to call the director and inform him. What kind of day is this? I wonder why she came here." Margaret struggled to climb the stairs, and the effort made her legs ache. Finally, the endless staircase came to an end. She sighed. The woman opened the heavy door and found herself in a large, crowded hall. The many bright lights, in the form of colored lanterns hanging everywhere, made Margaret close her eyes. The decorated tables were overflowing with all kinds of food. Waiters with golden trays walked by, and in the chairs were men in expensive suits and women in evening gowns. Margaret felt uncomfortable, but within a minute, she caught the contemptuous gaze of a man whose index finger was pointing directly at her. "What's this? This isn't a shelter for the homeless. Look at this. Hey, waiter, can't you hear me?" "Yes, of course. I'll inform the supervisor." We'll take care of this. Don't worry." The waiter hurried off. "That's right. This homeless person has a lot of nerve. Now they're entering the restaurant because the guards aren't watching," said the woman in the shiny dress. Margaret closed her eyes in horror. She had never experienced such humiliation. She wanted to hide. Another woman, influenced by alcohol, pointed a finger at the elderly woman and, unable to contain her emotions, said, "Isn't it a little late for a grandmother to be at a restaurant? At your age, you should already be thinking about eternal rest. Would you like to join us at the table? Just please, don't sit near me. I'm allergic to this kind of street smell." The loud laughter of the narcissistic woman echoed through the restaurant. The elderly woman tried not to cry in the face of such injustice. "What's wrong with me? Yes, I'm old, but that's no reason to mock and shame me in public. They themselves will grow old and sick. How can they not understand that? When I was young, this never happened. We always respected our elders, no matter how much money they had in their pockets." Margaret asked herself, but couldn't say anything aloud. But unfortunately, the ridicule of the elderly woman continued. Shouts were heard from all sides. "I didn't pay this money to see a homeless person. Why should we put up with such misery? What's the director doing? I'm going to shut down this restaurant." The waiters hid in corners and whispered among themselves. Many felt sorry for the elderly woman, but no one dared to confront the drunken crowd. These people like to come here to have fun and, more importantly, to show off their status. It was prestigious to work in such a place. The owner wasn't stingy and paid generously. No one wanted to lose such a prestigious position. Only one girl, a waitress, was very upset. She hated seeing a woman insulted just because she was old and didn't wear expensive clothes. Aren't they human beings? How can you mock an elderly person like that? "I'm going to speak to the restaurant director right now and tell him what's going on here," she said firmly. "You won't achieve anything with that. The director will support the guests anyway because they bring profit to the restaurant, and the woman will be expelled. No one wants her here. You haven't even worked here for a week. Maybe you shouldn't take that risk," the entire team of waiters whispered. "There are things in life more valuable than money, but you don't seem to know about them." The girl left the room with those words. The situation had become completely unbearable. A man staggered over to Margaret and, in a grand manner, said, "Well, why don't you sing or dance for us since you're here? Come on, come on." And the man clapped his hands loudly. His foolish idea was supported by the others, and the crowd laughed loudly. Margaret couldn't bear the humiliation any longer. Her heart ached, tears rolled down her cheeks. Her legs began to tremble, and she walked toward the exit. Before she could take a few steps, the door of the room opened, and a tall man appeared on the threshold. He looked questioningly at those seated at the tables and shouted loudly, "Gentlemen, what's going on? Is everything okay?" Margaret couldn't take her eyes off the man who had entered, as if she were paralyzed. "Stephen, my dear, you've grown, matured, and you look so much like your father. The same eyes and chin." Tears welled up in the elderly woman's eyes again, but now with a sudden joy, so overwhelming that, for a moment, Margaret even forgot the pain and humiliation she had suffered. But the man walked past her. He was more interested in the approval of his guests. "Stephen, everything's fine as usual, except for a little problem," said one of the men, pointing his finger at Margaret. "Well, why is she here? You have to admit she doesn't belong here. Yes, get her out of here. Don't embarrass us and don't ruin our night." The rest of the audience supported this. "Of course, it's just a misunderstanding, and we'll resolve it now. As compensation, dessert is on the house tonight. No one else will disturb your evening, gentlemen. And you, come with me," he said, turning to Margaret. He didn't recognize me, thought Margaret. Stephen was just a boy back then. So many years have passed. A whole lifetime. He may have forgotten. "Are you listening to me?" Stephen asked again, thinking about how to handle the conflict correctly. Yes, yes," the woman replied, waking up from her memories. Barely closing the door to the hall, the man said, "Hello, my name is Stephen, and I'm the director of this restaurant. I've been informed that the guests behaved inappropriately toward you. Please forgive them. They simply weren't expecting your presence in any way. I'll compensate you. I know you paid for the table, and you'll receive double the amount. Not only will you be able to eat, but you'll also be able to buy something for yourself. Stephen, of course, noticed the elderly woman's worn-out clothes. No wonder she was mistaken for a homeless beggar. And what do people like her want? Money, the more the better. But where did she get the money for a table? It's expensive, even for a working person. And most importantly, why? Anyway, it doesn't matter. Stephen decided he had no intention of dealing with this stranger any further. Let me show you the way out. Go downstairs, Stephen said, pointing to the stairs. Margaret couldn't believe what she was hearing. It was her Stephen. Yes, now a grown, solid man. But to her, he was still a child, and yet he was expelling her. The insults and humiliations from the restaurant guests were nothing compared to what Stephen had said. No, I won't leave until I talk to him. He must know the truth, she thought as Stephen had already pulled out his wallet and was counting money. Here, take it. It's all I can do for you, Stephen said. At that moment, it seemed as if the woman's heart would shatter into pieces, but she found the strength to say, Stephen, I won't take the money. Please let me stay and talk to you. Stephen felt that he was losing his patience. I have this homeless woman in my office, and I don't know how to get rid of her, he thought irritably. He felt himself getting nervous. It wasn't in his nature to waste time on idle chatter with complete strangers. Sorry, I'm a very busy man. I don't have time to talk to strangers, Stephen said. Don't get me wrong, the woman replied. I'm not a stranger. I'm your mother. The elderly woman could barely hold back her tears again. The receptionist, Madison, and the security guard, Robert, exchanged glances. I told you she was unsuitable. You shouldn't have let her in, Madison commented. Stephen didn't believe the woman's words. Look, this is too much. Why are you telling lies? What you're saying is a lie. My mother died years ago. As for the money, it's your right to take it or leave it, but I'll have to ask you to leave the premises. Robert, take care of her. After a few moments, Stephen disappeared from view. What are you standing there for? Let's go, Robert ordered. The elderly woman could barely stand. She was shocked by Stephen's words. The security guard closed the door behind her. The exhausted woman sat down on a nearby bench and cried. It was dark outside. Everything was ruined, and she had saved for so long, from her small pension, to pay for a spot at the restaurant where her son worked. Finally, the long-awaited day had come. In the morning, Margaret had imagined the moment when she would see her son and tell him everything so that she could, at least occasionally, see him while she was still alive. In her excitement, the woman hadn't even noticed the unpleasant wind that had risen in the evening. Her hands were frozen, and her old gloves had disappeared. Maybe she had lost them, but what did it matter now? The elderly woman thought, shoving her hands into her coat pockets. Suddenly, in one of them, she found an envelope. How could I forget? There's a photo of Stephen when he was 6 years old in this envelope. He must remember himself. Then he'll listen to me, exclaimed the poor woman. After the humiliation and insults she had suffered, she hadn't told her son the most important thing. Margaret decided to wait until he finished work and then finally talk to him. How much time had passed? It felt like an eternity. Finally, the door opened. Stephen and a few other people left the restaurant. He had already opened the car door, saying casually to the driver to take him home. Wait, dear, the woman shouted with the last of her strength. You again? Listen, go away quietly. Otherwise, I'll have to take extreme measures. I'll have to call the police, Stephen replied firmly and got into the car. Let's go. No, wait, Stephen ordered the driver when he saw the photo in the woman's hands. The man got out of the car and asked, confused, Where did you get this photo? When I was 6, a photographer came to visit us, and we took a photo as a keepsake. Don't you remember that? Stephen thought for a moment and said, I had 2 photos, but the second one was lost. Fortunately, it wasn't lost, the woman said confidently. Stephen knew that this photo had been with him in the orphanage, then with the family that took him in, and now it was in an old photo album. But how? I was told my mother died of a heart attack, Stephen wondered, but found no answer. Hey, you're completely frozen. Come on, I'll buy you some tea, and we'll talk, Stephen suggested. The woman agreed happily. Margaret was happy to finally be talking to her son, but while her heart was calm, something strange was happening in Stephen's soul. Emotions were overwhelming him. Mixed feelings of hatred and joy for finding his mother, and hatred for her abandoning him. Stephen was fortunate to have an adoptive family. His adoptive parents gave him everything: a home, a good education, and upbringing. But they were very strict in their demands. Stephen missed the love of his parents. Things could have been different with his biological mother. They could have been, but they weren't. Why did you abandon me? And now, suddenly, you're trying to find me. It's too late to change anything, he said. Son, listen to me. I'll tell you everything. Just please don't interrupt me. I was born into a large family. My mother had 7 children. I was the eldest. My father died. My younger brothers grew up, started their own families, and moved away. I stayed in my parents' house without a husband, without children, without a stable family. This pleased my mother, but I suffered for living my life for nothing. But one day, everything changed. Timothy came to town, and I fell in love with him immediately. My mother reluctantly accepted him. She had nowhere else to go, but my joy was short-lived. Timothy drowned. It was very painful for me. I was dying of grief, but the problems didn't end there. My mother died of a heart attack, and I was left alone. It seemed that life had no more meaning, but then I received good news. You, my son. I found out I was pregnant. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. I took care of you, loved you, wanted to be the best mother, caring and loving. A gift from fate, the woman said. What are you saying? Why did you betray me by placing me in an orphanage? You know, I don't remember your care, but I remember very well the terrible years I spent in the orphanage. If you came to ask for forgiveness for that, don't expect me to give it to you. Not even your advanced age will help, Stephen said with resentment in his voice. The light in Margaret's soul didn't last long. She had hoped so much that the photo she brought would help improve her relationship with her son, but unfortunately, it didn't. Wait, son, I'll explain everything, the woman began, but Stephen abruptly interrupted her. I don't need your explanations. I don't believe you anyway, the man said. So many years had passed since then, and he himself was nearing 60, but the memory of his childhood had never faded. He remembered how every Sunday, at the orphanage, he waited for his mother to come and take him home, but that never happened. Instead of his mother, a foster family arrived. Margaret didn't know how to apologize to her son for that. She always remembered the day she took little Stephen to the orphanage. He looked at her with tear-filled eyes and begged her not to leave him in other people's houses, but the woman had no choice. She herself was going to a strange place called a hospital, and possibly forever. Son, believe me, I had no other choice. My heart problem started a long time ago. At first, I felt discomfort, then severe pain and attacks. If you knew how much I blamed myself for not going to the doctors in time. When I did, it was too late. The doctor said that only surgery could save me, and the chances of survival were slim. And even if I survived, I would have to spend a long time in the hospital. Son, forgive me, I was scared. I had no one to leave you with. I begged my brothers to take care of you. And while I was in the hospital, my relatives visited me. But they all had children and used the excuse that they already had too many mouths to feed. I thought I was giving you up temporarily while I stayed in the hospital, but it turned out to be forever. But suddenly a miracle happened. The surgery was successful, and I was out of the hospital in a month and a half. I went straight to the orphanage to pick you up, but what I feared most had happened. You had already been handed over to adoptive parents. I pleaded in terror for the address of that family, but the orphanage director refused. From that moment on, life lost all meaning for me. I kept dreaming that one day I would find you, no matter what. Today was the best day of all, as my dream came true. I saw you. Stephen stared at the woman's face and hands for a long time, trying to remember his mother's features, but he couldn't. He had no photos of her, and time had erased her face from his memory. The woman spoke so sincerely about her life that Stephen found himself thinking that her words didn't seem false. It might have been a fairy tale, but he believed it. And how did you find me after all these years? Stephen asked. I'll tell you, son. About a year ago, in the park, I met a woman I had worked with a long time ago. Her daughter is the founder of a charity that helps place children in adoptive homes. This probably wasn't the right thing to do, but she did some research on the family that raised you. Then she helped me find you. Son, you're so successful and intelligent. I'm so proud of you. Margaret, of course, understood that her son wouldn't be able to forgive her. The pain of a mother's betrayal doesn't easily fade, but maybe one day he would be able to understand and forgive her. And that forgiveness would be the greatest reward she could receive. The prolonged pause was broken by Stephen. "How are you living now? How is your health? It's just that you look..." Stephen was confused, not knowing how to say, "You look homeless. Many people have already told me that today. I lost my parents' house. My sister's children, my nephews, tricked me and took my place. But I have a place to live. I rent a small room. Don't worry about me, son. The important thing is that you're doing well." They hadn't noticed how much time had passed while they were talking. It was getting dark outside, and it was still raining. "Can I take you home?" Stephen asked suddenly. "Yes, of course, son," the woman agreed. "Stop right here, I'm close by." "Just a few minutes," Margaret said hastily. "Are you sure?" "Maybe I should walk you," the man suggested. "Don't worry. Thank you for listening to me. I'll pray for you for the rest of my life." Margaret told Stephen the whole truth, but she hid one thing from him, something she was ashamed to say. She had lived on the streets for a long time, and then a man, in the yard of the house where she liked to sit on the bench, took pity on her. He was the caretaker and had a small room outside, where besides cleaning tools, there was a small sofa and a chair. That's where Margaret lived now. She lay down on the sofa. Her legs and head hurt a lot, but she was happy for the first time in years. That night, she had the best dream of her life, a dream in which she was with her son. A few days later, Stephen appeared at her door. "How did you find me?" the surprised woman asked. "You found me. Now it's my turn," Stephen replied, smiling. "Come with me," Stephen suggested. "Wherever you want. I'm going to introduce you to my wife and your grandchildren. You have 3 of them." Margaret was very happy. Then Stephen handed her a key. "I have a small apartment. No one has lived there for a long time, and now you're going to live there." Margaret had almost lost hope, but happiness found her anyway. It found her and warmed her like the hot summer sun. That happiness was given by her son, who was able to understand and forgive. Did you like the story? Thank you for your company. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below on what you thought of the story. See you next time.